Now, I have kept my mouth shut, and I have followed every COVID rule put in place internationally. I have been separated from my family for months over quarantines. I put my mask on if I am asked to. But in my view, there is a point of power-hungry absurdity that these COVID restrictions have reached. Absurdity that is not informed by medicine or morality. You have policies such as 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. curfews that have been put in place in Victoria, which are utterly destroying people's businesses. Melbourne cafe owner Michelle Loelo, her shop used to turn over $20,000 a week, and now she's bringing back $400 a week. She's taking the government to court over it. Because honestly, is Corona really more likely to get us at 8 a.m. instead of 9 a.m.? If you paint houses or mow lawns and work alone, you can't work in Victoria. Mowing lawns requires no contact with the client. As if restricting this makes any sense. People's businesses they put their lives' work into are going under. People aren't getting to see family members before they die. They aren't getting to see the birth of their children. Australia's mental health is utterly in decline. And if you ask questions about this, you are called anti-science. You're shamed for not caring about the greater good. Let me ask you, do those enacting these policies actually care about the greater good? Or are they just able to virtue signal their moral superiority from a place where they remain absolutely untouched by the negative impact of their policies? Of course, I'm talking about Dan Andrews. I'm talking about the political class and government workers who are unfireable and whose wages and job security remain untouched in this crisis. And hell, I think we all know their personal lives haven't changed much either. Multiple ministers who advised lockdowns have been demoted after being caught violating the rules themselves because the political class feel above these restrictions. And I think that's been our greatest lesson with Corona. The coronavirus is a poor man's crisis. This has become a classist problem where wealthy airlines are getting bailouts and political elites and their employees don't have to operate by the same standards everyone else does. I say, fine, keep the lockdown, keep shutting down industries for the greater good, do it. But for every private job lost, fire a government employee as well. See how fast politicians backtrack on their support for lockdown when it's actually their jobs on the line. Georgie, I would love to hear, do you agree that the coronavirus restrictions have devolved to a class-based system?
I think that absolutely the impact of COVID is being felt very differently depending on where you live and what background you're from and what sort of employment you have. But I would have to say that I disagree quite vehemently with the idea that there was no reason for these lockdowns. And if the lockdown curfews, for example, weren't effective, then why have we seen the numbers now get down from where we had, 4 figures a day of new cases, where the intensive care units were filling up, where you've had 25% of the healthcare workforce in Victoria become infected with COVID-19. There is no denying that this has been a medical crisis. And there was not, I think that to say that no one has felt the negative consequences of this, I would say that there is not a political leader in Australia right now, particularly not the state premiers or the Prime Minister, who haven't felt very keenly how disruptive and how damaging this is. And I don't think it's fair. I know that Daniel Andrews is incredibly unpopular, and I'm not saying that people aren't entitled to view him badly, but I think that to say that he has not suffered any negative consequences from this, I don't think that he has imposed the stage 4 restrictions on Melbourne because he wanted to ruin people's lives. I don't think they have wanted to put mental health into decline. I think they have tried to contain a medical crisis, and they have successfully contained it. And I think that is the proof that the lockdowns and the curfews, yes, they have been incredibly, it's among the strictest in the world, but they've had results. If we'd had these lockdowns and we were still seeing over hundreds and hundreds of cases every single day, then I think that there would be room to have a meaningful discussion about whether or not that's been effective. But when you look at this from a health perspective, and I think that's what we have to do, because what would be the economic ramifications of not of not having had the lockdown, of Melbourne just continuing to have 700,000-800,000 cases every single day, what would we be looking at now? Because I genuinely feel for women like Michelle who have had their business decimated. But I would also say to her that I think that in 6 months' time, if Australia is able to continue without having lost 20% of its population to this pandemic, that's still a good outcome. And we are going to try and help everybody get through from here. No one has sat back and thought this is a great way to ruin people's lives. And I think that it is naive, really, to frame it like that.
Well, I think there's a bit of confirmation bias there, considering cases are going down in places like Sweden, too, which I suppose means not locking anything down means also COVID cases go down. But, Michael, I would love to get your thoughts on this. What's your take on the lockdown in Victoria?
Well, the lockdown in Victoria was necessitated by bad Victorian state government decisions, which created the second spike in the first place, and that was all around hotel quarantine. There's a lot to be said about that. There's an inquiry into it at the moment. I hope it's going to get to the bottom of the reality and its findings will be clear and severe. I won't be holding my breath. But as for the overall situation with borders, I think the lockdown has gone too hard and too far. And as I said earlier with Antoinette's excellent topic on the fruit pickers, a lot of us live in cities. Most of the politicians live in cities. The coronavirus has affected, if it's affected anywhere, Australia's cities. You go west of the divide, there are towns there, country towns there, even some sizable ones, where the only thing they know about coronavirus is what they hear on the radio. They haven't had a case. And yet state-based restrictions have been applied to them as much as they have in many circumstances to the cities, which might have a couple of thousand cases over a few months. So I think we've gone too hard. And on the issue of financial compensation, you mentioned Qantas, Lauren. There's many examples, obviously. Look, that's necessitated because the politicians have effectively, and they admit this, put the economy into a recession. Now, having done that, they can't just let businesses big and small fall over. They have to try to provide some financial protection in the same way if you reversed your car into the person behind you, you've got to pay some sort of insurance for the damage you've caused. So I'm not against any of the financial help. I think job seeker being doubled was too high, but that's another debate. We can leave that.
Right.
But look, I mean, overall, I think we have seen an overreaction from our political class. I mean, let's not forget, this virus is imported into Australia. Now, if we had followed the Taiwanese model, and of course Taiwan is a hell of a lot closer to China in more ways than one, we would be in a far stronger, better position today, economically, than we would be otherwise. There are lessons to be learned here. We've done better than some. No, better than the Americans,
better than most.
Clearly.
We've done better than most.
Better than most. Better than most. But we could have done even better.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I hope some of those lessons will be learned.
Now, what I'll be curious to see is if those help to the companies, because I agree, if the government shuts down the economy, absolutely they should help. But is it going to be a George Orwell case where some animals are more equal than others, and you see some people's small businesses that have gone under that go ignored versus these large airlines that get bailed out?
Well, yeah, but see, some businesses are strategic and some, sadly, aren't, unless you take them in totality. A million small businesses
this is what
strategic,
I mean. It's a
but one
classist
coffee
thing.
shop via
It's
the
a
national
classist
airline.
thing.
Well, not really.
The little guy
really.
is getting ignored. All the big people, too big to fail, right?
Look, I'll jump in at this point. I think accountability matters. And, Michael, what you have said, the problem with Victoria with their second wave, which has had enormous impact on not only Victorians but Australians, was born out of mismanagement of hotel quarantine. And I think that we need to ask questions and we need to hold our leaders accountable. But I also do think it's a wicked balancing act between the right to live and the right to life. Do we just, and some people say, oh, well, those old people in aged care were just going to die anyway. Do we just let them die and let people, go out and get a haircut? And I do understand, Lauren, some of your points where perhaps some of the conditions of who can reopen feel a little bit arbitrary. My sister's lives in Melbourne and she's a beauty therapist and she won't be able to return to work, but her hairdresser colleagues will be able to return to work before her. So you can get a blow wave, but, you can't get a leg wax. So those small things are frustrating. She'll probably lose her business. But Lauren, I do need to raise or pick up a few points that you raised where you suggested that, government ministers were breaching COVID rules. I don't know, and a single one that has been found to have breached a COVID rule in Australia.
The New South Wales art minister was found to have
But he was reinstated. When police investigated, the $1,000 fine he was meant to receive, he didn't end up incurring that fine, and it was found that he didn't breach COVID, and that's one. So I think to suggest
that... was also actually the health minister of New Zealand.
No, but
but
talking in an Australian context, but to suggest that multiple...
I'm saying this is a government class.
No, but to suggest
worldwide,
that...
even in Scotland, they had
Can I finish? To suggest that multiple government officials are breaching these laws and are untouched by these laws, and that they're doing this because they get a kick out of seeing the rest of the country suffer, I think it's misguided, and I think it's unfair.
It is obvious to the public who are watching what's going on right now. You've seen, even just, let's go to the celebrity class, because I'm talking about this as a class issue.
I understand.
Celebrities who have gone out and they have done whole campaigns saying, we need lockdown, I am for COVID safe, and then we find out they're partying the next weekend. Half of this is posturing.
I understand, but that's different. How celebs behave is different to suggesting that the people we hold to lead and the people who are accountable to the public...
politicians.
There haven't been multiple, unless you
Canada, Trudeau was found to be visiting his holiday home.
We're talking in an Australian... We're talking in a... This is...
all over the world, this is a class issue. It's happened in Australia as well.
And, you suggested also that, perhaps politicians should lose their jobs or people in the public service. As we discussed earlier in Michael's segment, our public service has been so pulled back. Our levels have never been this low. And if anything, we need people in Medicare, in Centrelink, in ATO, all the people about 23,000 who lost their jobs pre-pandemic. So the public service is already stripped back. So I'm not suggesting that, suggesting that because other people are losing their jobs, that we should just, as a payback, let public servants and politicians lose their jobs as well.
I'm just saying, I think they would take it a lot more seriously, and the concerns of the people who are saying these restrictions have gone so far that they are destroying my business, I think if it were destroying their livelihood, they might take a step back and say, oh, actually, this matters. It matters how far we take this. It matters that we have put in a curfew that has destroyed this woman's small business.
Look, many small businesses, and my sisters included, won't reopen, and it's terrible. I think the rationale is that if we don't go hard, and I don't agree with the night curfew, because I think that's strange, and that's not based on any of the recommendations. No, but I do think that... sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. I do think that more businesses would have shut, and the economic impact down the track, had they had to go into lockdown once more, would have been more devastating. But, Michael, I know you're keen to say something at this point.
Thanks, Antoinette. I was just going to say, Lauren, I think to your point, in politics, obviously, perception is reality, isn't it? And you mentioned a New Zealand minister earlier. One thing that happened in New Zealand, which I think did help at least bring a bit of the public along with the Ardern government on this, is that the political class, I think it was 20%, took a 20% pay cut. Now, that's not a complete loss of salary, which has been the case for some small businesses, but still, it was symbolic.
Well, my colleague...
There was some aspect of we're all in this together, even if we're not fully...
Well, Michael, my Channel 10 colleague, Peter Van Olsen, directly asked Prime Minister Scott Morrison, will you be taking a pay cut in solidarity with Australians? And he categorically said, no, he won't.
No, that's right.
And I think that was probably a really good opportunity for him to say, you know what, I will. Whether it's, 10%, 20%, just to show that he's feeling the pinch.
Yeah, it's certainly not the same cut that the little guy is feeling right now, though. So I got to ask you, the viewer, do you agree that coronavirus restrictions have devolved to a class-based system? Please let us know via our website, email, and Twitter.